much, Madam Executive Director and Raf, for your availability and readiness to talk. So now, without further ado, let me give the floor to the Executive Director of UN-Habitat to make a statement about the second United Nations Habitat Assembly that opened in Nairobi today.
Thank you very much, Katerina, Excellencies, member of the press, friends, ladies and gentlemen. Karibuni sana Nairobi. And I'm happy to be with all of you here to talk about the second United Nations Habitat Assembly, the largest global international gathering in Nairobi since the end of the COVID-19 pandemic. This is the second time UN-Habitat is convening the United Nations Human Settlements in Nairobi. Our first assembly took place in 2019, if you remember. It was shortly before the world went into a lockdown and was hit by multiple crises. We are meeting at an extraordinary moment. The climate emergency, the massive destruction of communities due to the pandemic, and also the ongoing war in Ukraine and conflict and disasters worldwide that threaten our better future. But yet, no one will benefit from our loss of focus on sustainable development. We need inclusive and multilateral transformative actions to ensure we achieve the promise of the 2030 Agenda of Sustainable Development to leave no one and no place behind. The United Nations Habitat Assembly comprises of 193 UN member states and is the global authority on sustainable urban development and human settlement. So during these 5 days that the Assembly will meet in Nairobi, you have been given all this information, as what Katerina has mentioned just now. We expect resolutions in 5 broad areas that the member state prioritize at the high-level meeting on the implementation of the new urban agenda in New York. One is affordable and adequate housing. You hear this morning the discussion with and also the speech of the President of Kenya. Urban climate action, urban crisis recovery, localization of the SDGs, prosperity and local finance. These are the 5 areas that is our priority, and we hope that the resolution from this 5 days meeting will prioritize these topics. The Assembly offers an opportunity to strengthen our ongoing work on the Sustainable Development Goal, and we must double our effort to empower local and regional authorities to accelerate action towards fulfilling the 2030 agenda. That's why one of the 5 topics that will be discussed is localization on the Sustainable Development Goal, to make it local and have the impact. I would like also to sincerely thank the government of Kenya for their excellent support and collaboration in preparing this assembly. First, I would want to thank the President of Kenya, William Samuel Ruto, the government of Kenya, the Cabinet Secretary for Land, Public Works, Housing and Urban Development, Mr. Zakaria Nyeru. He's supposed to be here, but I think he's still stuck in one of the programs. We were just side by side just now. Cabinet Secretary for Foreign and Diaspora Affairs, Dr. Alfred Mutua, and of course, the Governor of Nairobi City County, Sakaja Johnson. We work with them in true spirit of multilateralism to make this assembly a reality. We have more than 130 member states represented, almost 5,000 delegates registered to attend the assembly. We have more than 80 ministers and vice ministers. This number have doubled since our first United Nations Habitat Assembly in 2019. We will have 36 side events, a number of press events, and 56 exhibitors who are bringing their expertise and solution for urban challenges. So if you have time, please take a walk at the exhibition and also at the Urban Expo. And I also would like for you to look at the corporate installation dedicated to the upcoming report on the SDG 11 that we will be presenting in New York in just 1 month, next month actually in New York. So my friends, our future is undoubtedly urban. You heard about the statistic this morning. I don't need to repeat. More than half of the world population live in cities and towns, and that proportion is going to increase to almost 70% by 2050. So therefore, tackling urban poverty and inequality and urban challenges is even more urgent globally in the global priority. We have international framework and roadmaps for urban resilience, the Sustainable Development Goal, the New Urban Agenda, the Paris Agreement on Climate Change, and we need action to bring them to life and address these urban challenges. I'm sure more discussion, negotiation, further elaboration will be required in the coming days. But however, it is important to remember that we want to have resolutions that can be implemented, not just a resolution, and have broad consensus, and also have benefited from input from our diverse stakeholders. The Assembly will seek to adopt a ministerial declaration to support sustainable urbanization apart from the resolution. So please keep alive the Nairobi spirit of constructive and consultative process, and keep in mind the people that we serve. I wish everyone a successful Assembly. Thank you. Asante sana. If you have any detailed questions about the Assembly, I have my strong colleague on my left to answer that question. Thank you so much. I pass back to you, Katerina.
Thank you very much, Madam Executive Director. Maimuna Mosharif is one of the tireless advocates of sustainable urban development. So she is a champion of a lot of these issues, and she is really looking forward to these days, to these 5 days where we are going to be discussing a lot of the issues related to sustainable urban development. As it was mentioned, there are 5 broad areas where resolutions will be proposed by member states. It's affordable housing, urban crisis action, localization of SDGs, urban crisis response, and prosperity and finance. So these are important areas that need to be tackled. Those areas were actually prioritized by member states themselves. But I think we have an expert here who can tell us more about different resolutions and about the areas and why exactly these areas were picked up. We have Raf Toots, who is Director of Global Urban Solutions Division at UN-Habitat, and he is happy to expand a little bit about the technical side of this work, and then we will open it up for questions and answers. The floor is yours, Raf.
Thank you, Katerina. Thank you so much. No, I'll just say a few words on these 9 substantive resolutions, because there are 9, and they somehow all contribute to this overall theme of the Assembly, which is about securing a more sustainable future through more inclusive and effective multilateralism, as the SDGs are not on track in these times of crisis. So the first 2 resolutions are focusing on the broad area of adequate housing. And there are 2, and in fact the one that is focusing directly on adequate housing could probably become a game changer for Habitat, because one part of the resolution is calling to establish a new mechanism for member states to discuss issues of adequate housing, to exchange data and experiences on this topic, which doesn't exist currently. We don't have such a global forum, and this would be very important, because affordable housing and adequate housing is a global crisis everywhere in the world, and we do not have proper forums to discuss this. still to be discussed, because this will be only decided by Friday, but I think we have made good progress. And related to that, there's a resolution on informal settlements and slums, and there's a global action plan that was launched last year in South Africa, and that comes up with 10 actions which member states are looking at to also support in, because there we're talking about moving in the coming 20 years from 1 billion to 3 billion people living in informal settlements and slums, and this needs a transformative approach. So that's the second resolution. Then we have 3 resolutions that focus on, let's say, the urban environment, the environmental sustainability. One of them is called Biodiverse and Resilient Cities, and it is very important because we never had a resolution on this topic. It is coinciding with the 10-year framework on biodiversity that was adopted in December in Montreal, which is calling upon all UN agencies to take a role. And of course, urban biodiversity and protecting biodiversity through responsible urban development is a role for UN-Habitat, and we're going to see a resolution on that as well. Then, in that same broad environmental field, there's also a resolution that is calling for a World Cleanup Day, which is focusing on waste, of course. And then there's another one on climate change, which is actually refreshing an existing resolution we have. And it is, it's focusing on the linkages between urbanization and climate change, and really building on what happened last November in Sharm el-Sheikh, when there was, for the first time ever, an urban ministers meeting on the margins of the Conference of Parties on the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And when the initiative Surge was launched, which we hope, again, which is focusing on 5 sectors where there could be gains made on climate action, and we hope that this initiative will be endorsed by member states in one form or the other in this assembly. So these are the first 5, and then there's some others which are also equally important. Executive Director mentioned localization. Again, this is a topic we have worked on for the past 5 years in different forms, and it's about strengthening the power and the role of local and regional governments to contribute to accelerate the implementation of the SDGs, but also about the power of multi-level governance, through different means that are elaborated in this resolution, and this is supported by or promoted by Brazil, and we are quite confident that this will be approved, endorsed by the end of the week. And then finally, there are 2 others. One is a very specific resolution dealing on the international guidelines on people-centered smart cities. Again, this is a resolution that's already agreed upon. Member states have agreed it's important to have guidelines to support local authorities in making decisions and strategies related to smart cities. Again, for the very first time, this is part of our strategic plan, but we didn't have a legislative mandate. Now we will, if this is approved, which it will be by Friday, we will have 2 years to develop a set of international guidelines to guide local, especially cities, on how to adopt and strategize on smart cities. And finally, there's a resolution on planning and sustainable infrastructure, which still needs a lot of work, and there's some different asks, but it's a bit too early to say how that's going to be turning out. So thank you so much, Katerina, and over back to you.
Thank you very much, Ralph, for explaining a little bit the technical side and different resolutions that are being proposed and are being considered during the second United Nations Habitat Assembly. I also, just before we open it up to questions, I think I just want to explain also, as we put in a lot of our materials, United Nations Habitat Assembly is the highest legislative body within the UN system that is composed of 193 UN member states, and it is the highest decision-making body on the issues of sustainable urban development and urbanization. Also, for you to get more information, we use the hashtag UNH2, UNH2, A2. This is where you can take information on social media, and then the website unhabitat.org/UNH2. This is where you have all the latest information in different tabs. You can see also draft resolutions there. You can see the program, and you can see different events, side events that are going on during this 5 days that we are discussing here at Nairobi at the UN complex. So now I would like to propose and open it up to questions. If you have any specific questions, when you're asking a question, we're going to take it one by one. If you can introduce yourself and then say which media outlet you are representing.
Something that the Kenyan president also mentioned. He talked about discriminatory practices in development financing. And as you know, in Africa, many countries are being, including Kenya, are being crippled by debt. And while some of the solutions being discussed here sound amazing and feasible, the issue that keeps coming up is financing. Can you tell us about the resolution, which has some mention of financing, and what possible other ways can be used to help fund this transformation that is required? Thank you.
Thank you. Is your question addressed to the executive director, or should I give it? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you so much for Madam for that question. It's why, as you know, that is the one of the 5 priority or the thematic discussion that during the 5 days is that prosperity and finance and local finance, because you see that COVID-19 has shown that our system now is not workable, meaning that when the COVID-19 happened, who are the frontliner is the local government. That's why we're putting up the local finance. And we also would like to link it to the effective and efficient multilateralism, meaning that from the top, either you're talking about global in the UN or the national government and also regional government or the local government, there must be a very transparent link between in terms of the financial network from the if in the country, from the national to the local, or if within country, as what you hear from the president this morning, we are not talking about global north, global south. If there is no equitable distribution of finance, then there will be no end to this climate change. And we have this resolution on the urban planning and infrastructure, when you talk about finance, how to finance, like for example, in terms of climate change, the climate adaptation and climate mitigation. On that part, I pass it to my colleague to explain more detail on this, as you asked about this resolution on finance. Over to you, Raf.
Thank you, Edie, and thank you for the question. Indeed, the finance is addressed through this resolution on planning and infrastructure. And it offers opportunities for a platform to discuss amongst member states and practitioners what are possible ways of financing urban infrastructure towards sustainable development. Within that, within the climate resolution, there's a very strong emphasis on finance as well. because we have been championing together with many other organizations like United Cities and Local Government, ICLE, which are local government networks that are focusing also on supporting local and regional governments to get access to finance. These are not easy issues. We have tried many things over the past years, different types of, for instance, investment preparation funds, helping city to formulate bankable projects. But it's very, very difficult to then make the step to actual large-scale investments and to make sure that the flows of the financing that are there in the world are actually flowing to sustainable urban development initiatives, including affordable housing. It seems that the investors find especially the social and the environmental kind of safeguards that are necessary in such projects, find these sometimes prohibitive to channel large amounts of resources in these areas, and that they are staying on safer grounds, let's say, in areas like in middle-income housing or in infrastructure that can easily be repaid by relatively wealthy municipalities. So we need to fill this gap because there's much more need for sustainable urban development finance to leave no one and no place behind. Thank you.
Yeah, Katrina, add to what Ralph said, that we know that the future is urban, but how can we finance the urban agenda? I think this is very, very important because you know that 70% of the population will live in cities by 2050, and another one is that around 75% of the infrastructure needed by 2050 is not built yet. So now, what type of infrastructure that we want to leave to our future generation? We are talking about green infrastructure. So that's why now we are hoping that after these 5 days of discussion, we can get something concrete and action-oriented in order for everyone to implement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Executive Director, and thank you very much, Ralph, as well, for all your explanations. Any more questions from the colleagues, from the reporters gathered in this room? You have one more question? Yes.
You said there were 9 resolutions. Some of them seem to be already firmed up. Where are the points of contention? Which are the areas that are keeping you awake at night? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we give it to our expert on the resolutions, to Ralph. Thank you.
So we are quite confident that these 9 resolutions will be passed. The question is how strong will they be? And that's, I think, what is remaining this week. Last week, member states discussed, and I think they agreed on 80% of the text of all these resolutions, and some of them are totally fine and cleared. One of the contentious issues is I mentioned about housing, that there is this, the idea to establish a working group or an expert group. And you know, the language matters a lot. How this is going to come out exactly has a lot of meaning. What will happen in the next 6 years, at what level, what will be the power and the influence of this working group. And 1 or 2 words can make a difference to make it a relatively maybe useful and benign group or a very powerful group. You know, it really depends on the wording, and that is not yet decided. So this is a question of negotiations between member states. Likewise, on biodiverse and resilient cities, there is consensus that this needs to be an area of work for Habitat, but then member states are not sure whether they want to move straight into providing guidelines which have international guidance potential, or first Habitat has to do more work, like doing a report on good practices on biodiversity and cities, which would be a kind of delaying towards maybe guidelines later in the day. Yeah, these are two of the more contentious issues, but I think generally we are on a good path for a good set of strong resolution that will define our work. Maybe just I need to mention that, you know, a resolution doesn't automatically come with resources to implement. And these are all types of resources: financial resources, capacity building resources, and we call upon everyone to, once the resolutions are passed, to also move towards very rapid resource mobilization. And maybe I'm happy to announce that this morning already, even before the resolution on housing is passed, the French Agency for Development, which is a 2 billion euro per year investment agency, are committing to work with Habitat over the next 10 years on the implementation of the resolution on adequate housing. So that's an example how a resolution then also needs to be followed by concrete partnership. Well, this is a memorandum of understanding which then normally follows with a bilateral agreement, contribution agreement. But at this stage, it's a memorandum of understanding to work on a number of areas related to adequate housing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Any more questions from the audience? No more from Context, from Reuters? Yes. Who needs a mic? No more. The lady.
Good afternoon. My name is Ateka. I would want to know how you're incorporating the resolution on climate change with what is happening in COP28, or we'll have like double resolutions here and there. Are you incorporating with what we are having on the ongoing COP28?
Can you also maybe say which outlet you're representing or who you are?
I am representing the State Department of Lands.
Okay.
And Fiscal Planning.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. No, this is absolutely in line with what happened last year in COP27, and it's actually making a bridge between the UN-Habitat Assembly and COP28 in Dubai later this year. And maybe there's also an issue that is still being discussed by member states. So in COP27, there were two major gains for cities. There was an urban ministerial meeting where dozens of ministers from all over the world came specifically to Sharm el-Sheikh for the first time to discuss climate action. And this has never happened, and this was a good thing, which already is in the current resolution asking the executive director to continue working with the COP presidency to organize such urban ministerial meetings. The second thing is an endorsement of this search initiative, which looks at sustainable urban resilience for the next generations. And it is, there it's a question of really what you're hinting to, this connection between something that's decided in COP or something that was launched in COP. How can we maximize this impact through this assembly, which is an assembly of 193 member states, and this was endorsed by a smaller number of member states. So these are the finer details that need to be connected. But of course, our assembly is different from the Conference of Parties. So it's not automatic that something that's decided here will automatically be transformed. We still need to do a lot of energy advocacy to make sure that the member states convening in the framework of the Climate Convention then borrow from these decisions and then transformed this into other decisions for the Framework Convention, which is operating at a very different level. It's a very different discussion. It's about making commitments for climate mitigation and adaptation in the global scheme of things. We are looking at the urban dimension of this. So these are very complementary processes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think our time is already up for the press conference. I would like to thank everyone for coming today and spending time with us. I also would like to thank our esteemed speakers, Madam Executive Director of UN-Habitat, for spending time to come and explain us a bit more about the Assembly, and then also for Araf Toots to explain a bit more on the technical side and all the resolutions and all the discussions and all the contentions that we are going to face this week. So thank you very much. Please follow us at #UNHA2. These are where we are going to have all the news. Also on the website, unhabitat.org/unha2. That's where you will have all the latest information, the resolutions, and all the necessary program details. Thank you very much once again, and I hope that you will enjoy the rest of the Assembly. We just started today, and we have 5 more days to go. And we hope that we have good outcomes on Friday, and it's going to be a milestone for sustainable urban development. So let's see. And goodbye.